This happened back in 2019. My old friend Jake called me out of the blue one evening. We hadn't talked much since college, so I was surprised. Turns out he was getting married in January and he wanted to do a sort of pre-wedding reunion with all our friends from middle school. He'd found this isolated cabin up in the mountains, no distractions, no city noise, just a chance to reconnect before his big day. I still remember how excited we were. I mean, we grew up together, but life moves on and people drift apart. It felt like the perfect plan to get that old spark back. Jake booked the place for a weekend in late December and we all piled into 2 cars to drive up there. The cabin was bigger than I expected. It had a weathered look with these creaky wooden steps leading up to a wide porch. Snow covered everything. The nearest town was a good hour away, maybe more, and our phone signals pretty much died as soon as we turned onto that long dirt road. But we figured that was the point, no distractions. The first night was mostly catching up. We unloaded our gear, told stupid stories about the pranks we used to pull in school, and grilled some steaks. Around midnight, we finally turned in. 5 guys sharing a 3-bedroom cabin, no problem. The place felt cozy, though maybe a little too quiet. On the second night, I was dead asleep when my friend Marcus shook me awake. He looked uneasy, like he'd seen something he couldn't quite explain. He whispered that when he got up to use the bathroom, he noticed a figure standing by the tree line, staring straight at the cabin. He thought maybe it was a lost hiker or a hunter, but the way the guy just stood there completely still creeped Marcus out. I was groggy and brushed it off, told him to get some sleep. We agreed we'd check in the morning to see if anything was out there. The next day, after breakfast, we found these strange footprints around the cabin. They were spaced oddly, almost like someone barefoot had walked in a complete circle around us. We joked that it must have been an animal or maybe a prank from one of the guys. But no one confessed. Even so, Marcus looked worried. Later, we decided to explore the woods. The place was surrounded by tall pines and the snow was thick in some areas. While we were hiking, Marcus suddenly stopped and pointed. A man stood a few yards away wearing a heavy coat and holding a hunting rifle. At first, we thought it was just a normal hunter. These mountains are known for wildlife. But then he smiled in this unsettling way, like he recognized us. Marcus swore it was the same shape he'd seen the night before. That evening, Marcus barely spoke. He sat by the main window, sipping coffee and staring out into the dark. We tried to lighten the mood, cracked a few jokes, but eventually he told us more about the man in the woods and how sure he was that it was the same figure from the tree line. We laughed it off, teased him for letting his imagination run wild. None of us fully believed it was a big deal. Around 2 a.m., we were hanging out near the fireplace, just messing around, telling old jokes. Suddenly, we heard footsteps on the porch outside. Not heavy stomping, more like soft, deliberate steps. One of us called out, "Who's there?" No response. The footsteps stopped. We listened for another minute, but all we got was silence. We convinced ourselves it was just some animal brushing past and went back to our conversation, though the mood was definitely tenser. The next morning, a few of the guys went out hunting just to see if we could catch anything. Marcus came along, but I noticed he kept scanning the tree lines instead of focusing on the hunt. Eventually, we packed it in with barely anything to show for it. The man Marcus claimed to have seen was nowhere to be found. That night, the snowstorm hit hard. We were sitting around the table about to cook what little game we'd gotten when someone knocked on the front door. We exchanged looks. Nobody expected visitors, especially in a blizzard. One of my friends called out, "Who is it?" A low voice replied, "Please help me. I'm stuck in this blizzard." We hesitated for a moment. Then we let him in. Once the door swung open, Marcus froze. It was the same man he'd seen. Tall, heavy coat, looked like a hunter. The guy seemed half frozen and barely able to speak. We decided to let him stay until the storm let up. It took a few hours, but eventually the wind began to die down. The man thanked us quietly and said he'd be on his way. We were relieved to see him go. But then maybe 10 minutes later, we heard knocking again. Same spot. Same sound. My stomach turned. Why would he come back? We opened the door and there he was. Gun in hand. Aimed right at us. Before he could say anything, my friend Jake, who was closest to the door, lunged at him. They wrestled for control of the gun, and the rest of us jumped in. It was absolute chaos for a minute, snow swirling in from outside, yelling, shoving. But we managed to subdue him and yank the gun away. We called the local police, who arrived in a squad car The squad car looked like it had struggled to make it up those icy roads. The police arrested the man, but they wouldn't give us a straight answer about who he was or what he wanted. One officer just said, "It's better you don't know." That line has stuck with me ever since. We never found out what the man's story was, why he'd been watching us from the woods, or why he came back armed. Part of me wonders if he was even alone. Maybe there were more footprints we just never saw. We left the next morning, cutting our trip short. Jake got married a month later, and none of us have spoken about that night since. It's like we silently agreed it was best left alone. But every so often, I catch myself thinking about it. The moment he first appeared in our doorway, that quiet smile he gave us in the woods, those footprints circling the cabin. It all feels like a question we never answered. A few years ago, I rented a cabin for a week, just looking for peace. No traffic, no constant notifications, just a little solitude. The place was surrounded by tall pine trees, and even from the outside, it looked rustic, in the best possible way. The first 2 days went by smoothly. I spent my time hiking, reading, and occasionally fooling around on my laptop. At night, I kept the small fireplace going and fell asleep to the soft crackling of burning wood. It felt exactly like the kind of getaway I'd always wanted. On the third day, I decided to take a longer hike through the woods. The snow was fresh, with a light crunch under my boots. I ended up walking farther than I intended, because the trails were absolutely gorgeous. Frozen creeks, branches weighed down by snow, and a peaceful silence that felt almost therapeutic. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was low on the horizon. As I approached the front door, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. It was the distinct sound of footsteps running inside, like someone was trying to move quickly from one room to another. My first thought was that maybe I'd left a window open and the wind was banging something around. But it sounded too solid, too human. Heart-pounding, I unlocked the door and stepped in cautiously, calling out a tentative hello. I searched every corner, under beds, in closets, even the cramped pantry. Nothing. The place was empty, just as I'd left it. I tried to brush it off. The cabin was old. Floors could creak. Maybe I was hearing echoes of my own steps outside. Or maybe I just spooked myself. I forced myself to forget about it and settled in for the night. The next day, I lounged around in bed for a while, catching up on some work emails. The late afternoon light was streaming through the windows when I heard it. The front door's hinges gave a long, drawn-out creak. My stomach flipped. Someone was at the door, or worse, coming inside. Without thinking, I locked my bedroom door. I pressed my ear to it and listened. Footsteps again. But this time, they were slower. And there was something else. The faint buzz of voices. More than one voice. At least 2, maybe 3. They were talking in hushed tones. Indistinct, but undeniably there. I stood frozen, body tense, until the sounds finally faded. By the time I opened my bedroom door to check, the front door was still locked from the inside. All the windows were shut. There was no sign anyone had entered, yet it felt impossible to deny what I'd heard. Still trying to rationalize, I opened the cabin door and stepped outside. Right away, I saw footprints in the snow. Fresh ones leading away from the cabin and into the forest. What unsettled me most was how shallow they were. Almost like someone had walked barefoot without sinking in too deeply. In that temperature, walking barefoot through the snow seemed impossible. I followed the tracks for a bit, hoping for answers or at least some kind of explanation. The trail led deeper into the woods. And soon, it wasn't just one set of footprints. I counted multiple paths branching off, like a small group had split up. Then, right ahead of me, I saw them. 3 people, standing completely still. Each one wearing a dark hood. They didn't react when I called out. They just turned and walked away, disappearing deeper into the forest. I stood there for a moment, stunned. Nothing about this made sense. They hadn't threatened me, but the whole thing felt very wrong. I rushed back to the cabin, mind racing. Should I call the police? But what would I even say? I heard footsteps, saw 3 hooded figures. Hardly definitive proof of wrongdoing. Maybe they were hikers, albeit strange ones. Or locals out for a walk. By the time I tried to settle in for the night, I was on edge, expecting to hear footsteps or voices again. Oddly, nothing happened. The next morning, I decided to give the place a thorough check. That's when I noticed a corner of the living room rug slightly curled up. I pulled the rug back and discovered a small door in the floor. An old hatch leading to a cramped, unfinished basement. It was dark and musty, the kind of place no one would want to spend much time in. Yet the moment I shined my flashlight down there, I saw it. An old mattress on the floor, surrounded by crumpled food wrappers and discarded clothes. Someone had been living beneath my feet. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, I heard a soft shuffling sound coming from below the floorboards. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought it might burst. I didn't dare investigate on my own. I waited until dawn, mustering up the courage before venturing into the living room. The hatch door was slightly ajar, like someone had opened it from below. That was enough for me. I called the local police immediately. 2 officers arrived and I explained everything. The footsteps, the voices, the footprints in the snow, and the hidden basement. We went down there together. The stench was stronger than before, stale sweat and damp earth. Then we found something else. Another door, tucked into the far side of the basement wall leading outside. A makeshift exit. If anyone had been down there, they were long gone now. The fresh footprints outside suggested they'd fled into the woods. The police didn't find any conclusive evidence of a crime, but the fact that someone or several people had been secretly living in that basement terrified me more than any ghost story ever could. The officers told me they'd keep an eye out for suspicious activity in the area. Then they suggested I pack up and head home if I felt unsafe. I didn't need convincing. I left that same day. The drive back to my apartment was a blur, my mind racing with it. Questions still haunt me. Were those hooded figures the ones living under the cabin? How long had they been there? And most unsettling of all, what would have happened if I hadn't realized they were inside until it was too late? I've thought about it every night since. I still wonder if they watched me from the cracks in the floor and listened to me walking above them. While they bided their time, part of me is relieved I never found out the full truth. But another part of me, it can't shake the feeling that I only scratched the surface of something much darker, and that whoever was down there isn't done creeping around cabins in the woods. It was 2015 and I was so excited when we first planned the trip. My husband Adrian is usually all about efficiency, always rushing from one task to the next, never pausing to catch his breath. He works long hours at his firm and practically lives by his calendar alerts. Even at home, he's the kind of person who cleans the dishes the moment he finishes eating, never letting a second go to waste. So when he agreed to a relaxing getaway in the mountains, I thought finally we'd have some real downtime, a chance to slow him down. We drove up a winding road for what felt like forever. The Airbnb listing had promised a cozy cabin with modern amenities, close to a hiking trail and a picturesque view of the lake. Adrian, of course, insisted we leave before sunrise to beat the weekend traffic. Typical him, always in a hurry. By the time we arrived, the sun was well above the tree line, casting a bright light on a small wooden structure nestled among the pines. Right away, something seemed off. The pictures online showed a newly renovated deck, a shiny barbecue grill, and large windows with fresh white trim. The cabin we pulled up to looked older. Faded wood, chipped paint, and a front porch that sagged near one corner. I double-checked the directions on my phone, but we had no signal, and the offline map had led us precisely here. Adrian, never one to waste time, hopped out of the car, grabbed our bags, and marched up the steps without a second glance. I followed, feeling a gnawing sense of uncertainty. The front door was unlocked. A bit strange for a rental, right? We stepped inside and immediately a smell hit us. It was like damp wood and stale air, maybe mildew. Not overpowering, but definitely noticeable. The layout also wasn't quite what we remembered from the photos. The living room was cramped with worn-out furniture that looked at least a couple of decades old. A threadbare rug sat in the middle, its edges curled up. The place had an odd feel to it, like someone had lived there for years without cleaning or redecorating. It wasn't filthy, just neglected. Adrian, however, was more concerned about getting our luggage settled. He zipped from room to room, dropping suitcases, checking the fridge, opening windows, always in motion. The first real red flag came when we opened the bedroom closet to hang our jackets. The odor of mildew practically rushed out. The walls looked damp, especially in the corner near the floor. Maybe the cabin is just older than the pictures showed, Adrian mumbled, pressing a hand to the drywall. He pulled out his phone to contact the host, but there was zero reception. He shrugged like it was no big deal. That evening, we tried to make the best of it. I cooked a quick meal with the limited groceries we'd brought. Adrian set the table. We ate mostly in silence. Despite being out here for relaxation, I could tell Adrian was still in that mindset of constant motion. His foot tapped under the table. After cleaning up, immediately, of course, he offered to start a fire in the fireplace. The wood burned with a crackle, adding some warmth to the chilly mountain air. We dimmed the old overhead light and curled up on the couch. though it felt lumpy and smelled a bit like dust. I tried to distract myself by flipping through a local trail guide. Adrian scrolled through offline emails on his laptop. His face was lit by the screen. Now and then, he muttered about how odd the place felt, but never long enough for me to respond. Then, around 10 p.m., something happened that I still can't fully wrap my head around. We both heard a sudden ping on my phone. It somehow picked up a weak signal. A message from the Airbnb host. "Hey, just checking in. You never arrived at the cabin. Are you still planning to come?" I read it twice before handing the phone to Adrian. Adrian went pale and reread the message himself. "Then where are we?" I whispered. For once, Adrian had no quick answer. He just stared at the text. We double-checked the host's name, comparing it to the listing details. Everything matched, yet here we were, sitting in a rundown place that didn't belong to the person we rented from. Adrian jumped up, grabbed the keys, and started for the front door, as if he were ready to drive off right then. But it was dark outside, with no clear markers on how to get back to the main road. Our offline map showed the correct address, pinned exactly where we stood. He cursed under his breath, pacing back and forth in the tiny living room. I followed him to the window and peered out. The porch light was weak, but the trees beyond were pitch black. We decided to head upstairs and see if there was something we missed. Maybe a sign that we were in the wrong place. But the second floor was just as eerie. More damp walls, an ancient dresser with missing knobs, and a single rocking chair near the window. The smell of mildew was worse up here, like something had been rotting behind the walls for years. We spent a sleepless night in that musty bedroom, half expecting someone to barge in and claim we were trespassing. Adrian hardly moved, which was shocking for him. He just lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I could feel his tension with every shallow breath. By first light, we decided to leave. We packed in record time. Adrian's efficiency finally felt useful. As we carried our bags to the car, I had this nagging urge to look around the house's exterior. My gaze drifted over the peeling paint and the rotting porch steps until something caught my eye on the far side of the cabin, near the foundation. The boards looked pried open, like someone could slip in and out through a gap in the wall. There were footprints in the dirt too, leading into the darkness of the tree line. They looked recent. The hair on my arms stood up. I glanced at Adrian, who was already in the driver's seat with the engine running, beckoning me to get in. I slid into the passenger seat, and we tore down that dirt road as fast as we could. Later that day, once we found a reliable signal, we got another message from the Airbnb host, apologizing for any inconvenience and asking if we needed directions to the actual cabin. We never responded. We didn't want to admit where we'd actually stayed or whose place we trespassed into.